we had a 5,000 album record library. The format was you had to play 3 tracks an hour from a top 25 album list that Jackie McCauley, who was the first African-American woman to graduate from Rice University in Houston. She was an amazing program director.
Welcome once again to the Talking Archive. I'm Josh Jacobs, and our conversation concludes now with radio personality and singer-songwriter Kenny Noble Cortes. Now, Kenny, last time we talked about American Graffiti and specifically Richard Dreyfuss. Now, who in your family looks a lot like that iconic actor?
Let me give a plug to my family. He always reminded me of my brother. My brother is 20 months younger than me. My brother, Lawrence Noble, is a recognized, actually around the world, a sculptor, and he was an illustrator at the time. And he did. My brother did the poster to The Empire Strikes Back. For George Lucas, and he's gotten to be good friends with George Lucas, and he also sculpted the sculpture of Yoda, which is at the where Lucas works. What's it called? Luke.
Lucasfilm.
Anyway, it's a big statue and fountain there in front of Lucas's place that he sculpted. So I'm just giving my brother a plug. He's a pretty famous guy, and I'm lucky to be his older brother.
Yeah, in fact, I'm looking at his website right now, and you're right, he does look a lot like Richard Dreyfuss. Dang. I remember seeing the Color of Money with Paul Newman, which was the sequel to The Hustler, about 25 years after that movie was made. And Paul Newman had a mustache in that movie. I said, man, he looks like Richard Dreyfuss when he has that mustache.
One other plug for my brother, one more, and I'll let it go. He did the cover of Queen's Flash album, which was the soundtrack from Flash Gordon, which I guess I'm thinking that was an 80s film, early 80s film, something. But he did the soundtrack to that, and that was his design, where the orange, fully orange album cover, and all it's got in yellow, Flash.
Wow,
that was his design. So that's kind of a pretty big feather in his cap.
Yeah, I remember back in the 70s and 80s, they had the Z Channel on cable locally here in Los Angeles. And sometimes as Phil, they show some Flash Gordon shorts or movies with Buster Crabbe, and that's how I got to know about Flash Gordon. And so about a year later, after having been introduced to Flash Gordon, I heard about the movie they made in modern times in the 1980s. So I never saw the 1980s movie, but I remember the black and white films from the probably 30s and 40s.
That's what my dad grew up on, and I took my dad to I was working at KLOL in Houston. It was a progressive rock radio station. This was 1977. And we had a screening of the premiere of Star Wars, and it was the same week that Star Wars appeared on the cover of Time magazine. And I remember the cover that said "Movie of the Year," and I think it had a question mark after that. And so we had a special screening at KLOL Houston, and I took my dad to that. And Dad was a big Flash Gordon fan because he grew up in that 30s and 40s era. And then after the movie, he was just thrilled. He thought it was awesome. And, of course, everybody did. I thought it was pretty awesome, too. But he said, hey, that was Flash Gordon. He said, that's exactly what Flash Gordon was all about. So, of course, Flash Gordon was cheesy because they had the rockets. It looked like they were held with little strings that were, and smoke coming out of the back. It was pretty hokey, but the storyline was kind of like the same thing, and that's what he was referring to. So that's a special memory I had for him.
That's great. And at KLOL Houston, Progressive Rock, how much input did you have as far as the playlist? Because it was a more progressive rock station. Was there a playlist, or was it more freeform?
It was mostly freeform. We had a 5,000 album record library, and the format was you had to play 3 tracks an hour from a top 25 album list that Jackie McCauley, who was the first African American woman to graduate from Rice University in Houston. She was an amazing program director. I mean, an amazing program director, and it was just I loved her, and I think everybody else did too. She did a great job with KLOL, which had the top ratings. All of a sudden, I forgot the question you asked me.
Yeah, the how much was it freeform, and how much was a playlist? And I think yeah. So 5,000 record, 5,000 album library. Our format was play 3 current songs from the top 25 album list. Mm-hmm. Everything else was up to us. Whatever we wanted to play. Wow.
Whatever we wanted to play. And that is a daunting responsibility, because you kind of had to know the music. And if you didn't know the music, you weren't going to do very well. So it was a real challenge, and you had to be thinking ahead of time. 1, you had to queue up albums, and then 2, you had to know what you were queuing up. So it was work. I mean, it was a lot of work, and you had to really keep up on what was going on. So, but it made for a very interesting, and I think a compelling music format for the listeners who really appreciated that. I started out doing 10 p.m. to 2 a.m., and I loved the names of the DJs back then. Jack Smack, who did the Jack Tuck. He did evenings, and then Neil for real did 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. And at the time, I was doing 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. And then it was like that. I forget some of the names of the other guys.
Was there any type of moniker you were given? I don't know.
No, I was just Kenny Noble.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I mean, I got to use my whole, and such as it is. I mean, I don't know if there's anything spectacular about that. Maybe it shows a lack of ingenuity or something. I couldn't come up with a good moniker. Other than I did come up with something. Let's see, what was it? You play on my last name. No bull in the morning. So
there you go.
I think that kind of works, kind of. But it was fun to do, and the music was great to play, and I was exposed to a lot of music. One thing that I recall, there's 2 things I recall. I remember one morning, Robert Palmer was in the studio, and I can't remember the name of the morning host at the time, but anyway, he was there, and I introduced myself, and we were just chatting back and forth, and I kept thinking, I wish I didn't interview him, but I think he was being interviewed by the evening personality. His name was Ed Beecham, and that was great, but I wished that I had, and he was in his, he was in his suit and tie and everything. I mean, what an unusual image Robert Palmer had.
Oh, yeah.
That was right when Doctor, I think that was his big at the time. But the story that I wanted to share with you was Jackie McCauley told me that Bob Welch, who had just released French Kiss with the single Sentimental Lady, which he wrote for Fleetwood Mac, and it does appear on Fleetwood Mac's Bare Trees album.
That's right, yeah, originally. Then when he re-recorded Sentimental Lady about 4 years after he originally recorded with Fleetwood Mac, it included Mick Fleetwood on drums, John McVie on bass, Christine McVie on keyboards and background vocals like on the original album. The only difference was that Danny Kirwan was the guitarist on the original version, but since he was fired from Fleetwood Mac, Lindsey Buckingham instead played guitar on the Bob Welch solo version of Some Old Lady, but you pretty much had the same crew playing on both versions.
Yeah, and there was a little more passion in French Kiss, and I can understand.
Oh yeah.
But he was coming by the station to promote the album, and he wasn't with a record promoter or anything. He was just by himself. And so Jackie invited me to go to lunch with her and Bob Welch. And so, I mean, nobody was overdressed, let's put it that way. I mean, my whole DJ wardrobe pretty much throughout my career was T-shirt and jeans. That's pretty much what I wore. So that's what I had on. I mean, it had clean clothes and I looked nice. They weren't, ratty jeans or anything, and I had a nice shirt on. But and so did Bob Welch. Bob Welch had a black. Actually, Bob Welch had a nice. It had a collar on it, and he looked nice. He had it was a long sleeve black long sleeve shirt, and I think he had black jeans on or something. And Jackie always dressed nice, and so we went to lunch at this exclusive restaurant, and they stopped us at the door, and they said, "Sorry, we got a dress code here." "Oh, yeah, what's that?" I said, "Well, you got to have a coat and tie." And so we all looked at each other, and Jackie said, "Well, let's just go elsewhere." So I always say that I got tossed out of the same restaurant that Bob Welch did because we didn't have the same, we didn't live up to the dress code that they experienced. We went to a place called the Hobbit Hole. And all they did was sandwiches, and everybody was dressed casual. So we really enjoyed that, and it was a fun time. And I got to know Bob Welch a little bit. So that's kind of a feather in my cap, or a badge that I wear with honor, that I got tossed out of the same restaurant that Bob Welch did.
That's an era of Fleetwood Mac that a lot of people don't know about. But Bob Welch and Christine McVie, their vocals blended together so beautifully. On YouTube, they got the episode, the Midnight Special from '73, where it's Bob Welch and Christine McVie. The first tune, called Miles Away, has Bob mainly on the lead vocals, but Christine blending in on certain parts of the song. And then the second tune is Believe Me, with Christine on lead vocals and Bob, joining her in the chorus. And just like, oh my gosh, their vocals are so good. And then they had a guitarist named Bob Weston, who was really cool as well, playing the steel guitar and the lead guitar. And it's definitely a forgotten era of Fleetwood Mac. I'm sure that some of those tunes got played on the freeform FM rock stations, but just didn't make it to the top 40. Like KNX FM, I remember they play a couple of the new KNX FM online plays a couple of Bob Welch era Fleetwood Mac tunes, and so it's definitely worth a listen. Yeah, and back in that day.
In fact, this was prior to any of the Stevie Nicks or Christine McVie vocals. They did have a hit, and it was called Albatross, and it was basically an instrumental Fleetwood Mac song. And I always loved that song and played it whenever I could at KLOL. So that came out fairly early, but was quickly relegated to ancient history when what was the album that Dreams was on?
Oh, that was Rumors.
Rumors, yeah, Rumors. When Rumors came out, and that started something really big for Fleetwood Mac. And I guess Stevie Nicks is still going strong. I don't know what Christine McVie or is Mick Fleetwood still around?
Mick Fleetwood's still on. Christine McVie died in December of 2022. I think she had cancer, and it was just heartbreaker because she'd been really a part of the band since 1969, joining toward the end of Peter Green's run as lead guitarist and lead singer, and of course Jeremy Spencer. And then she was there during the Bob Welch era. She and Danny Kirwan were together for one or two albums before Welch joined. And she, of course, was you had three main lead vocalists in that group between 1975 and 1987. That was Christine McVie, Lindsey Buckingham, and Stevie Nicks. So they oftentimes traded lead vocals, and you provide you a variety of sounds and hits and stuff. And that was the cool thing about it. In fact, I remember when K Earth 101 got revamped by Johnny K back in 2006, 2007. I heard Over My Head by Fleetwood Mac from their first album with Lindsey and Stevie. That had Christine on lead vocals. I'm like, I have not heard this song in years. It gave me instant flashback, or instant recall. I was like, dang, I remember this song when I was a little kid. I haven't heard this in years. This is a really cool tune.
Christine McVie has a lot in common with Carole King, and that is that back then, and for really a couple of decades after that, you never saw a clear photo or picture of their face. Christine McVie and Carole King both, they were, their face was always in the shadows. They had a hat, with the brim over their face or something like that. So they had kind of like Dwight Yoakam in country music. It's like, what does the guy look like? That was kind of interesting. And I think, if memory serves me right, Lindsey Buckingham taught Stevie Nicks. He either gave her some fine tips on the guitar, or may have even taught her the guitar, but certainly worked with her significantly on the Landslide. So I remember hearing that somewhere, and I thought that was kind of interesting because she really wanted to play and wanted to learn something. And if you listen closely, and I do play guitar, and Landslide is a very easy song to play, but because it's got Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks performing together, it sounds a little more complex than it actually is. And of course, Lindsey Buckingham's guitar work is legendary.
Oh yeah, one of the best. In fact, when he left Fleetwood Mac in 1987, they had to hire 2 additional musicians. They hired Billy Burnett on lead vocals and rhythm guitar, and then they got Rick Vito to be lead guitarist to make up for the fact that Lindsey was gone.
Wow. Well, speaking of gone, I could go on for hours about my career in radio and so forth, but I think I've kind of exhausted my brain for this particular podcast.
Well, we'll talk again because there's some stories. I love the fact that about KLOL. That was a great story right there. Next time we talk, I'd love to talk to you about your time at the Loop in Chicago, as well as your book called Culture Jock, 1 Foot in the World, 1 Foot in the Church. By the way, if you want to purchase it, just go to culturejock.net. That's culturejock.net. This is the Talking Archive. We're talking with Kenny Noble Cortes, radio disc jockey as well as singer-songwriter and author of that book we just mentioned, Culture Jock. And hey, thank you for being with us, Kenny.
You bet. I really enjoyed it. Let me just clarify one thing. Somebody might have a question, and that is, for the first half of my career, I went as either Ken or Kenny Noble. Noble was my dad's last name. And then when I went to Miami, and this is I got to tell you this story. Tip Landay, who was the assistant program director at Coast Los Angeles, became the program director at Coast in Miami. And I was living in Seattle at the time and working at KRWM. And Tip Landay gave me a call, and he said, because we got along well, and this goes to show it's always good to never burn a bridge. And I had a good relationship with Tip when I was working at Coast in Los Angeles. And Tip called me, and he said, "How would you like to do mornings in Miami?" And so my wife and I flew to Miami and said, "Hey, this isn't bad." And it was in February, and then the weather was magnificently perfect, and so I ended up going there, and that was just a special time in my life, and I'll share more about that the next podcast. How about that?
I'm definitely looking forward to that. By the way, this is the Talking Archive. We've been talking with Kenny Noble Cortes. He's a radio disc jockey and singer-songwriter. And this is not the end of the conversation. We talked a little bit more after this, and that's coming up next time here on the Talking Archive.